Hey up and welcome to another episode of Last Cast. You join us today once again on the banks of the River Calder, but this time a bit further upstream, just above Brighouse. The river up here is a bit different to our previous video, which we'll link in the description. It's a lot shallower, even more dominated with trout and grayling. As you can see, there's a way behind us, pacier water, and it's much more clear as well. So with that in mind, we're going to look at fishing one area of the peg with just a stick float, but using a couple of variations on that. As I say, trout and grayling are going to be the main target. There might be a few coarse fishing in and amongst that, so that's why we've got the keep net in today. We're not going to be keeping trout and grayling in there, obviously, you know, welfare of the fish and all that. So, as I say, we've got a nice peg here, a good run. You can see behind us there's almost a confluence of two streams which create this channel on the inside, which we're going to target, and that's going to be the main area that we're going to fish in the peg. We're going to use maggots and a few bits of worm, but mainly maggots as feed. They'll need wind onto it because it's early season, so they've not really seen much anglers bait yet. So as I say, you can see we've got set up in the water, waded out into that nice little run there. So we'll now move on to looking at the rigs in a bit more detail. So as you can see, we're down at the peg now. So what I've just said is I'm going to run through the rigs and sort of the minutiae of each one. So the first rig that we're going to look at fishing is a lignum stick. Now, the reason why I've chosen this float particular pattern here, being by Dave Howell in a 2 number 4, is firstly the depth. It's very shallow here, maybe 2.5, 3 foot at tops, and it's sloping away from me. So with this rig, the idea is to fish a more natural kind of falling bait, something that's going to imitate a loose offering as closely as possible. Not really geared towards catching a lot of fish, but it's like the idea being that if the fish are hard to catch, this is the one to get them on. So what we've got, starting from the bottom end, and we'll work up to the float and talk about that, is at the bottom end I'm using a Kamasan B511 in a size 22, and that's tied to 08 line. Again, as I say, this is geared towards catching these early season fish where they're going to be a little bit more wary of anglers' baits. So it's better to start lighter. I've also gone for that pattern because it's got a small micro barb on it, and that's ideal for these grayling and trout. The problem is with grayling is they twist and turn in the water, and obviously trout will jump, and that creates points where the line can go slack, and they've got a nasty habit of twisting off hooks to grayling. So if I do hook a good one, I'd like to be able to land it. I say that micro barb I've just flattened down a bit, again, fish safety. Moving up there, just above a 6-inch hook length, again 6-inch hook length because of the depth of the water, we've got a number 10 shot, and that's going to be my bite indicator, you know, the primary dropper. And above that we've just got number 8s, strung out shirt button style, getting a bit tighter towards the top because of the compact nature of the rig due to the depth, and that then moves up to the float. As I say, it's a 2 number 4 lignum stick by Dave Howell. These patterns are really good for this kind of fishing because they've got a very thick dome top. Again, we're fishing just below a weir and the water's boiling and swirling, and there's no point fishing a float which you can't see. So visibility, primary factor when you're fishing like this. The other option that I would have in this swim is using a shouldered lignum, again 2 number 4, which I might change to later if it calms down a little bit, but the odds are I'll probably have to remain on a dome top or an alloy stick. Again, it carries a bit more shot than the lignum because it's got a slightly lighter base, but it's on the same kind of principle of stability, a nice shoulder on it. Again, a little bit more finesse than these lignum sticks that I'm using today because of the finer tip. So these are things that I might consider using in this peg, say if the water was running a little bit slower, a bit clearer, that kind of thing. Again, the rod here, we've got a 15-foot Matt Match Tech. 15 foot allows me to reach pretty much wherever I want in the peg. As you can see, I'll be fishing pretty much in the flow where I'm going to be feeding, so it allows me to work every bit of that peg. I can cover more water and keep control over a greater range across the peg. So the second rod I've got, just going back to that, we've got a closed face Abu 506 on there for control. Again, a bit more finesse. The second rod is a bit of a contrast to that. I've got a 13-foot light to medium action Garbolino here. Got an open face reel this time because we're going to be using a loafer float, and this is if the fishing really picks up. This is a really quite aggressive rig. It's got a 4 gram Olivet and just a single dropper, which is a swivel, and that's on a 3.6 pound Bayer pearl on mainline as opposed to a 2.6 on there. The idea with this is bombing the bait straight to the bottom and delivering it to where the feeding fish are. So if there's a lot of fish in your peg, this is the way to catch them. You'll get the bait straight down, especially with these trout. Sometimes they can move right up to the top end of the peg where you're feeding, and this means that it's fishing immediate basically. The 4 gram Olivet will go straight down and you'll be fishing right over the bait. On the hook length there, we've got O11, and that's to a size 20 wide gate match. Again, a barbed pattern, but this is a lot heavier, a lot stronger. Small size 20 because I'm wanting to use single baits and, as I say, a bit of finesse, but it's heavy enough if we do encounter bonus fish to cope with them. So that's the rigs looked at, all sorted there. We've seen the hook patterns and why I've used those. Again, the line on that is O11 hook length, as I say, just a bit stronger. So the baits that we're going to use today, we've got a couple of worms, but we've just got whites with a few reds mixed in as a change bait there, and a few yellows as well. That's going to be the primary feed. We're going to be feeding that almost constantly from the off. I may consider using a bait dropper, but the odds are that it's just going to be loose feed today because of the shallow nature of the peg. So as I say, that's all looked at now, rigs and baits sorted. So we'll now get into the fishing and show you how we're going to work our way through the session. Right, so we're just about ready for the first cast of the day. As I say, going to slip a single maggot on, using a contrast bait and a red maggot this time. Straight onto that size 22 hook. And the first thing you'll notice is where I'm laying the rig. It's almost directly in front of me, just downstream. That's the reason why I've waded out to this distance, just to get into that depth. You'll also notice that I'm feeding well downstream. Just missed a bite there on the first run through. Feeding well downstream because I don't want to spook the fish really. It's shallow water and the bait will get down fairly quickly, but it's better to catch them where they're confident. If I'm trying to catch them off the end of my keep net, then it's just going to be a nightmare, especially if you start spooking fish. And it's hard to get the rig to settle that early. So fishing well down the peg, just holding that back and easing it through. There's a bite there again. I believe they might only be small trout, these. And you can see the ease with which I'm able to lay the rig in there. Just follow it up with some bait behind it and we're into a fish now. Looks like a grayling and it's come off. So fish on the second cast there. Again, this is why I've started on small hooks. It's just double that maggot over the hook point there, which is why I've not hooked him. Again, grayling can be very difficult like that. Similar kind of thing like when you're catching roach, they'll double that maggot over the hook point. I say, starting like that, I've been able to get bites very quickly. And I'm just holding that back, another bite there. A short distance down the peg, another one there as well. And what you'll notice, I'm feeding very small amounts but almost constantly, and I'm pretty much holding that float back. Again, because I'm stood in a line with where I'm fishing, I'm able to just keep that rod high and keep in really good touch with the float and control it. Again, where possible, it's much better to wade out into the water like this. It offers you much better control over the float. It's just getting towards the bottom end of the run there. So you're just going to keep that bait trickling in, little and often. Again, it might be an idea later on to introduce a bait dropper. Maybe if it goes quiet, try and kick-start the peg. But it's better to start steady. And we're into another fish right at the bottom end of the run here. Again, feels like a small fish. Just going to keep that rod low. What I'm also doing, you'll notice I'm trying to keep him out of the main flow there. Just makes playing them a lot easier. It's like a nice little grayling, this one. Let's try and ease him towards hand. A lovely first fish there. Nice small grayling right at the bottom end of the run. Again, slightly difficult to handle these fish, but what I prefer to do is just turn them upside down. Seems to calm them just a little bit. Just allow me to nick that hook out. So we'll now release him. So we'll turn the right way up. So good start to the session there. Hopefully there'll be a few more to come now. Same again, that fish there was just as I was holding that bait back quite hard towards the bottom end of the run. Just had a bite there as well. Seems there's a pocket fish at the top end of the run here that are right under the maggots. I suspect they're trout. They're usually the first ones to take up residence at the top of the peg and bully the other fish out. And it appears that the grayling are further down. So just going to keep that bait going in. There's a bite there. We're into another fish now. Oh, and he's come off. Same again there, it does happen with these fish. What I might consider doing is stepping up from a 22 to a 20s if I lose a couple more. But the main thing at this stage in the session is just to get bites. Right, going to start holding the float back a little bit harder. I've noticed that that's where I'm really getting bites, is when I've fed, allowing the bait to just get past the float and then holding it up. The bites seem to be quite forthcoming then. Just that bait's rising up, the fish are taking it, another indication there. So just drawing that bait into the feed, holding it back and letting it run through. But I've not had any indications when I'm running the bait at the fish as yet. So that's telling me that this is the rig to use. The loafer float might have to wait for a bit later on when they're getting a bit more confident. Just inching that through the peg now. Just working it towards the bottom end of the run here. So using the closed face reel allows me to fish a lot quicker. As you can see there, I'm able to reel it straight back up towards me, press the button, release the line and allow it to just continue back down. Using an open face reel, it's a bit more hassle doing that. So just aids that speed element, allows me to just get a good rhythm there. Another small bite there. So at the moment, just at the stage of working out the feeding pattern and where best is to catch the fish, where they want to hold up, and happy to sit and feed. I've had a couple of bites towards the bottom end of the peg, but they seem to be coming up the peg quite quickly. Another little bite there. Often these grayling can be quite finicky. You've just got to be aware of that when you're fishing for them. So not going too mad with the feed, just introducing 5 or 10 maggots each run through. Maybe once or twice each run through, in fact. There's a bite there, missed it. A bit further down the peg. There's a bite there, tiny little indication. It's about halfway down the run. And you can see this nice soft action rod, able to keep that hook in place. I've stepped the hook size up now after a couple of bummed fish to a size 20, hopefully just to get a bit more purchase on them. Looks like a small trout this time. Just use the landing net for him. So just draw them upstream of the net, and as soon as they turn they'll just fall back into the net there. Yeah, it's a nice little trout. Just sort the hook out. It's just come out in the net there. He's just wrapped himself in the line. But still, sort this out in a second. Nice little fish to catch there, as you can see. We'll get him back. Just had that small trout there, just down the middle of the run. Say halfway down the peg, that's where I want to be catching them ideally, but once again it was just as I was holding that bait back, he's just nicked it and lip hooked himself, and the hook came out in the net. So, as I say, it's showing that they're not taking bait confidently, but they're still happy to feed. But that's the whole point of starting with a bit of finesse. Maybe if I'd have started on, say, the loafer float rig or a heavier hook pattern, I might not have had these bites and these indications that are telling me where the fish are. So it's always better to start lightly and just ease your way into the peg. You can always step up later on, but there's no point starting heavy. As I say, you want to be able to suss out the peg fairly early on. So just keeping that loose feed going in. See as well, the advantage of using this lignum stick is just how quickly it settles. As I was saying earlier when we were describing the rigs, that an alloy stick will carry more shot, but it won't settle quite as quickly and offer the stability of a lignum stick like this. And I think that's what's allowed me to catch these fish, is they're not sitting right on the bottom. There's a bite there and another fish. And every time it's where I'm holding that bait back and those light dropper shot are just lifting that bait up there. Feels like a half decent fish this. I'm just going to keep that rod low. So there is a bit of a knack to playing these grayling, because the way they twist and turn, you can see just by keeping the rod low there, he's happy to swim upstream. If you start lifting the rod, they're more likely to turn and flip and shed the hook. Just got to keep a little bit of pressure on him. It's running upstream, so it might be a better fish this. It is. Nice grayling. Just gonna have to play him very softly here. Hopefully I can just turn him upstream. See, this is where the hooks can often pop out. Might just get him here. There we go. And he's in the net. Nice grayling this one. So hopefully be able to hold him up for camera here. Just lightly nicked in the scissors this one. Pop that hook out. Get it out of the way there. We'll hopefully be able to show him to camera. See, they can be a bit of a nightmare, these fish. So, lovely fish to catch there. We've just sorted him out with the hook. Stunning grayling, a good 10-12 ounces there. Put up a great fight. So we'll just release him now. So they're quite difficult to hold. Just let him recover in the current. And off he goes. See his red dorsal fin there sticking up. Lovely fish to catch there on the third run through. So I've had a good start to the session here. I'm just going to slip on another red maggot. We're getting quite a few bites now, but as I've already said, I've identified that they're really taking the bait only when I'm holding it up and holding it quite hard against the floor here. Getting that buoyant top on the lignum stick also helps that. A shoulder might be better if they become even harder to catch later on in the session, a bit more finesse, and I can hold it back even harder against that floor. But at the moment, I'm able to just inch it through with that lignum stick. And they've seemed to be quite readily coming up the peg, and that's another bite now. Just as I was about to feed. Again, going to keep that rod low. And try and ease that fish away from the main current here, which is sort of to my left-hand side a little bit. You can see how quickly there he's come upstream. Feed off a little bit of line. Again, it feels like another decent grayling, this. about the same size as the last fish. What I've noticed though, I've just stepped up from a 22 to a size 20 hook, and immediately I've had 2 fish on it. Again, a light pattern hook, but I lost about half as many bites as I was getting initially on that 22. And just stepping up to a 20, that small difference means I get a bit more purchase on these fish, and I'm actually catching a better stamp, in fact. So again, as they get a bit more confident, I might even step that up to an 18. It's putting up a good fight, this one though. Hopefully just be able to net him. Again, they're always searching for that faster flowing water, so you've got to be careful with him. You can see his dorsal fin up there. Hopefully he won't quite flip out of the net, and he has. Just have to be careful with him. Take your time. So it's a bit harder this one because he's really tried to get into that current. Hopefully can just guide him over the net this last time. There we go, and he's in. Another lovely grayling. In fact, this one might be slightly bigger than the last, a really nice size fish. So again, just gonna try and nick that hook out in the net. But once again, only just nicked in the corner of the mouth there. You can see the maggot appears undamaged. Just shows how lightly they're taking these baits. So I'll just pop this out of the way and hopefully we'll be able to show him to the camera. Another lovely fish to catch. There you go. Lovely River Calder grayling. Bit better behaved, so we'll just release him now. So again, just hold him in the current. Let him recover a little bit. There he goes. Really good start to the session today. Does really highlight though, this early season fishing is they're not ready to take the baits confidently. You've got to really use a bit of finesse. Just trickle the bait in and ease your way into the peg. I'd bet that if I was fishing with the loafer float right now, I wouldn't be getting any bites at all. I'd say it's made a massive difference though, stepping up to that size 20 hook. That's 2 really good quality grayling in 2 casts now. And they don't seem to have a preference as yet for the colour of the maggots, as long as it's presented properly. But they both came from halfway down the run there, the same spot. So again, I've actually started feeding a bit further down the peg now, towards where they want to be. Another bite there. Just I'm holding it back. What I'm doing is I'm feeding, drawing the float back up towards where the feed's gone in, and trying to get that maggot to run down. Another bite there, in and amongst the loose offerings. So you can see how the lignum stick will settle and cock, and then those droppers will fall through the water, and that should put the maggot in amongst the loose offerings that I'm putting through the peg. Again, where I'm stood, I'm able to keep that rod nice and high, keep a lot of the line out of the water and get some really good control of the float. Another bite, again in the same spot. Smaller fish here, maybe a trout due to the way it's jumping. In exactly the same spot. And I'm just going to draw him into the slacker water that's actually further out in front of me. Hopefully steer him out of the flow. Maybe we'll use the landing net here. No, it's another grayling actually. But a smaller fish this time. Oh, another lovely fish to catch. See, there's a bit of a change, he's taken that down a bit, which may be an indication that they're actually starting to gain a bit more confidence around the feed. Just let him calm down a little bit. Himself well hooked. There we go. Another small grayling there, popping back. See just how difficult they are to handle. Very wiry fish. So you've just got to be careful when you're trying to remove that hook that they don't twist and turn and end up snapping the hook link, especially with an 08 hook length like we're using today, very light. So you've got to just be very careful with them. You don't want to be leaving small barbed hooks in fish. So the session's going really well now. And if we start getting a few fish like that where they take the bait down a bit more, then it may be an idea to switch that loafer and really try and put a few fish together quickly. So the past 3 grayling have all come from exactly the same pocket. It's where the float is now. So in that area, what I'm doing is just holding the float back, trying to get it to stay in that zone just a little bit longer. If that's where the fish want to be, then that's where I've got to try and put the bait to catch them. Just getting a couple of bites now right at the top end of the run, exactly where the loose fed maggots are going, and those missed bites could be a product of small trout, maybe small grayling that are quickest to the bait. So when I'm feeding those maggots, I'm holding that bait really hard against the floor just to get it to rise up into those top layers. Again, always trying to imitate the loose feed. Tiny little bite there. So depth wise, I'm just fishing about an inch over depth, maybe 2 inches in certain places, and that's again just to help me hold back in the flow, just getting that maggot to just triple on the bottom as naturally as possible. Again, as I've said, light hook lengths, small hooks. You want to really try and imitate exactly what a loose maggot is doing, which is often harder than you'd think, especially with turbulent flow like this. So again, just keeping that rod really high. Barely got 2 feet of line actually in contact with the water surface, so I want to maintain contact with that float at all times. And speaking of the line, using Bayer Pearl on, it's quite a classic reel line for stick float fishing. It's, for its breaking strain, it is a thick diameter, and that actually helps it float, which, as I say, allows you to keep in contact with your stick float that you're running down the peg. Also has quite a bit of stretch as well, so it's more forgiving, and it's also fairly stiff as well. So fishing like this, it's a line that I'd certainly look at. Something also like Drennan float fish. It's ideal. You don't want to be using these modern high-tech lines that are more suited to waggler fishing on still waters and getting the line through surface tension and sinking. Slightly thicker, slightly stiffer line like this just offers you more control. Getting a couple of very finicky bites now. Maybe an idea to have a little look at changing the shotting pattern perhaps. Again, I've also alluded to potentially switching to a shouldered stick float and holding back really hard. So again, that's another option I might look at. There's a bite down there as well. Missed 2 bites on that run through. Again, just drawing that float back into the loose feed. They all seem to be in a very similar area where I'm getting the bites here. So it may well be a case that I've got a few fish shoaled up down there, but maybe after catching 4 or 5 they've just switched off a little bit, becoming a little bit more wary of any unnatural baits that are coming through the peg. Oh, just missed one there. Right, so we've just had a short quiet spell there, and it appears that we're getting a few false indications, missing a couple of bites, and it just doesn't seem to be quite as good a fishing as it was a short while ago. And what I've just noticed checking the rig is that while I've been playing these fish and handling them, the float's actually moved up the line there. And I can identify this because what I do with all my stick float rigs is I put a small shot just beneath where the float is. Once I've plumbed up the peg exactly how I want it and get the float set at dead depth or thereabouts, as close as you can with river fishing, I put a small shot just beneath the float, and I nip that on quite tight so it doesn't move. And what that does, as I say, it's a depth marker, like when you're marking your top kit with Tipex when you're pole fishing, that kind of thing. So that's been a useful little tool there to help me identify why I'm not getting the bite. So I've just moved the float back down now, and hopefully we should get into a few fish again. As I say, that'll make all the difference there between catching plenty of fish, getting a bited chuck, and not getting a single bite. So that's a top tip there to introduce into your stick float fishing. Right, so you'll notice now we've just switched over to the loafer float. They've been a bit finicky on the other rig, the stick float. So what I'm going to do is really try and run the bait at them, almost force them to take it before it gets past them. And occasionally this can work to pick off a few fish, especially the trout as well. They seem a lot more susceptible to this kind of rig than the grayling. The grayling often require a bit more finesse, whereas the trout can really be caught out by, as I say, with the aggressive niche which they feed. If you're running a bait past them, they can really snatch at it, and with a 4 gram Olivet, they almost hook themselves. It can seem a bit excessive, but when the fish really are having it, it's the only way to catch them. As you can see though on the reel, I'm just carefully inching it through. I'm not really releasing the line because of the turbulent nature of the flow. I had a bite towards the bottom end of the peg there. So I'm not able to just open the bail. I'm going to allow the float to charge down the peg, because especially with the faster water on the inside, it's really going to drag that bait unnaturally. So what I'm doing is just trying to keep in contact with it. Again, using a heavy float like this, especially a loafer with a really buoyant tip, I can really keep in contact with it. Again, with these rigs, it's important to have them set up, and it allows you to explore more ways of catching the fish. Had an indication there. Again, these are still towards the bottom end of the run. As I was saying, it gives you more options then. It's better to have them set up to try it. An indication there as well. Seems with the disturbance, the fish really have moved down the peg quite a lot. So as well as that, with this rig I've incorporated a swivel above the hook length, again a 6-inch hook length, but the swivels to compensate for how far I'll be running it down the peg, and also the fact that these open face reels have a faster retrieve, and that's going to cause spin on the line. It may be a rig that I'll look to use double maggot on, and again, that's when you really want to incorporate that swivel, just to prevent the line twist. Especially with short hook lengths, they can really twist up very quickly if you're not careful. Just running that float through. Set this a little bit more over depth than the stick float, the lignum stick, because of the buoyancy in the tip, I'm able to do that. So again, when you're running it through and there's a fish, the bottom end feels like a good fish this. Just as I was saying there, running that float through at a bit more pace and up in the feed suddenly sparks the fish into feed, and it feels like a trout this. It's fighting well, it's going upstream, usually a sign of a good fish. It may be a grayling, it's hard to tell sometimes in the fast current. And a good sized trout here. Bigger than the previous ones that I was catching on the lignum stick. As I was saying, that running of the float through the peg at pace forces these bigger trout to have a go at it. So whereas a bit more finesse is required for the grayling, it can actually be quite the opposite for trout, even though you're fishing the same peg, feeding the same kind of way. Not a monster, but nice sized fish. Again, just nicked in the top of the lip there. Just get a disgorge to get that out. Right, so we'll just slip the rod out the way there and just have a look at him. So a nice little trout there, bigger than the previous ones. Decent size towards the bottom end of the pegs, as I say, up in the feed has clearly triggered him into feeding. Just put him back now. Point to make there is going back to the hook choice. The hook on here, Drennan Widegate match, it's quite a heavy hook, nice and sharp. And when you're catching trout, especially on a rig like this, it's geared more towards the trout than the grayling. Is you want a fairly heavy hook to keep that maggot down with a positive rig, but also you want a hook that you can really set in the trout's mouth. They've got quite a bony mouth, so a heavier but still quite small hook allows for that penetration and good hook hold. Again, as going back to the idea of early season fishing, is you've got to have your rigs and the kit right, have a good level of finesse, but make sure that you're able to catch these fish and land them. So looking at small minutiae such as hook choice, hook pattern choice, is a key aspect of it. So I'm going to keep the feed going in, fairly aggressive still, and try and run the float at them again. Hopefully we might be able to encounter a few bigger trout. So I'm feeding a good handful rather than the 5 or 6 maggots that I was feeding earlier, looking at more 10 or 20 every run through. Trying to really force the peg and running that loafer float through a bit more aggressively, so making the trout snatch at it. And that's met by a firm strike to set that hook. So say the heavier gauge, you need to put a bit more pressure on them to set it. But as you saw there, once it goes in, the trout aren't coming off. It's getting into the same area now where we had that last bite and it's gone again, missed it. Seems that they are towards the bottom end of the peg now. Again, as I say, the disturbance may well have been the driving factor behind that. So what I'm going to do is just change to a red maggot. A bit more of a target bait. Had that last fish on a red maggot, so I think that's what I'm going to go with this cast. Just nicked on there. So you'd be surprised by the size of the hook that I'm actually using. It's a very small size 20 hook is the Drennan Widegate match, but when you're just fishing single maggots, trying to make the bait look natural is certainly the key to it. So a small but strong pattern hook is really what you're looking for. So I've said it is micro barbed, but with the barb squeezed down a little bit, it just offers you a bit more purchase on the fish, but you're not causing any damage and they're still just as easy to unhook. So again, getting towards that area where we had the last fish, there's a few fish rising right at the bottom end of the peg and it's gone there as well. Looking at catching these fish right down the bottom end of the run here. So with that in mind, I may well put in even bigger handfuls of maggots and try to just keep the fish down there where they're happy to be. There's a few fish rising down there, there's a few trees that overhang it, and it may well be the natural food source dropping off the trees that's holding them. So as well, using a float such as a loafer with this very buoyant tip, very thick diameter, just allows me to see that float as well in the dappled light further down the peg. And the wind's picking up now, so the weather may turn on us a little bit, so it might end up bringing the session to an early close, but we'll just see how we go. Yes, into another fish on the loafer float here. Again, that was a lot further out towards the middle of the river, further down the peg as well, and it just does seem like they really are spooking. But another very positive bite. Again, looks like a trout this, but I could be wrong. I know it's actually a grayling, another good sized fish. So you use the net on him. And with the heavy gear on this rod, I'm able to bully the fish in a bit more. But with the loafer there, the bites weren't coming quite as frequently at all. I was getting a few indications, but not very many. So once again, just pop that out of the way. Just ever so slightly nicked in the bottom lip. Again, a nice fish to catch. Not quite as big as some of the other grayling that we've had today, but still lovely size. It's not been particularly well behaved though in the hands. Lovely fish. Just getting back. They do seem to be just moving out towards the middle of the river and being a bit more finicky now, so it may well be an idea to just revert back to that stick float really to maximise the last of the peg for the final hour that we're fishing here really. Just have another run through on this, see if we get any more bites, and then we'll look at finishing the session on the stick float. There's a bite and another fish. Again, a bit further down the peg, they appear to have spooked a little bit, but interestingly enough, it seems from where I'm stood that the flow's actually pushing a bit more towards the centre of the river here. It's forcing the fish out a bit more. That's why I've had the past two bites is further to my right hand side than the first 4 or 5 fish that I was catching. But again, it all seems to be in the same area. This looks like a decent grayling again. It's hanging down well in the current. So hopefully I can just ease him round from where the flow is now. It's actually pushing through a bit more just under my feet than it was before. Maybe there's been a bit more rain upstream as the forecast was. So perhaps we might call this the last fish of the session. Say we're only down here for a few hours today. It's putting up a very good fight. Say rain's forecast later, so if the river's pushing up now, it may well be the case that it's rained further upstream and we're due that later on. So we'll call this the last fish of the session and conclude with it. So what I'll do now is just pop the hook out, sort him out, and then we'll hold him up for camera to conclude the session. So as you can see, an immaculate River Calder grayling there. Another lovely good size. Again, plenty of fight still left in him, and that's the fish we'll conclude today's session with. A cracking fish to catch on the stick float. So we'll just release him now back into the current. As I say, this will be our second video on the River Calder that we've done. So we'll link down in the description to the previous episode, which was shown a bit further downstream towards Murfield. We'll probably look at revisiting the Calder certainly in another couple of months' time, maybe even towards winter, and we'll look at then fishing further downstream in a deeper stretch of river, just towards Brighouse town centre, where there's a lot more coarse fish, a bit more variety. We'll maybe look at employing a few different methods there, like the waggler, perhaps a feed, or even the pull. Again, when the river's a bit down and a bit clearer, but because of the depth, it'd be a good idea to fish that. So as I say, you can expect a few more videos from us on the River Calder, explain a few more details about river fishing. So once again, from the Last Cast team, thanks for watching, don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you on that next video.